My name is Jay Whiteley, for those that don't know me. I've been hosting some Zoom calls with some winemakers throughout the county in the last little while, and hopefully this will be another fun evening. Try and keep it to about an hour or so. I encourage you all. Part of the fun is if you guys have any questions. Some people have sent me some questions beforehand, and if anybody has any questions during it, I would encourage you to either put your hand up in the reactions button on the bottom. We'll get to you. I'll pull you in, and or I'll put them in the chat box, whatever you are most comfortable with. And keep yourself muted if you can, please, while we're going on, so everyone else's background noise don't get in there. So for everybody here, and for those that don't know everybody here, I'm going to ask Colin, Keith, Lee, and Mackenzie to each introduce themselves, because we have 4 great winemakers here, and I'm going to ask them to, as we collectively pass this 1-year coronaversary, I'd like to know if you guys can tell us something positive that arose from a pivot that you had to do at the winery this past year. So why don't we start with Lee, because you're in this corner here. So why don't you ask us, or tell us, Lee, what's changed, or what positive thing have you changed in your winery due to COVID this year?
Positive thing that I've changed? I changed nothing positive. No, but my name's Lee Baker. I'm the winemaker and grape grower at Redtail Vineyards. And I'd say like one big positive change is actually the online sales at the retail store have been greatly positive. The overwhelming support of people trying to buy more local products direct from the suppliers has helped us create a more viable, sustainable business as far as sales go. And we got to meet a lot more people virtually than ever before as well. So we've actually made some really, really strong connections with a lot of our customers through online sales that probably wouldn't have been possible if COVID didn't really happen, I would say. Am I paused?
Perfect. Thank you. That's yeah, no. I know that's good. That's good. Thank you, Lee. Colin, how about what's changed over at Stanners? What pivot have you guys had to do that's changed in a positive light for you guys at Stanners?
Last year because of COVID, we did all our tastings outside, and that worked out really well. It was fun. People seemed to enjoy it a lot, and yeah, it was a nice atmosphere out there.
The outside patio was fantastic there. I like the umbrellas, and it's a nice space to be in there.
Yeah, it was nice to use it for a change.
Thank God the weather was good this year.
Well, yeah, it was good. I mean, there were some issues. It's awfully windy in the county, so sometimes tasting outside in the wind wasn't that fun when the wine glasses blow over. But aside from that, it was pretty good.
Good. All right, thanks, Colin. Keith, what positive pivots have you noticed or changed due to COVID this past year?
Well, for my little rant before everybody got online, we were way more proactive, knowing everything that was necessary to bring the guys up this year, so we could get a head start on the vintage. And much like Colin, I think much like everybody in the county, there's not a lot of large indoor spaces for tastings. So I think that everybody moving everything outdoors was a huge advantage. We had a decent sized garden, if you've ever been to Closson Chase, and we made it even bigger by extending the fence, and we're doing a couple other things this year, and putting in more sunshade, because last year was really sunny and hot and bright and intense if you didn't have any type of canopy. So I'm excited about that. The reason to come to the county is to see the vineyards anyways. You don't necessarily want to be cooped up inside at a tasting bar. The other thing that we've moved to is full table service, where it's almost like a kind of like a patio. So in terms of that, so more table service and more guided attention. The other thing we started to do is we took a page out of Niagara and started to do some curated wine tastings that were hugely popular. Because what we found was there's a segment of the market that wants some more involved wine experience. So catering to that and to and giving everybody the opportunity to taste wine and feel safe doing so was something that we embraced.
Private wine tastings have been really great for wineries. Thanks, Keith. Mackenzie, what positive things have changed at Trail due to COVID this past year?
Hi, everyone. I am Mackenzie. I'm the winemaker at Trail Estate. And the positive thing, I mean, besides running private wine tastings that Jay ran, that was pretty positive, but I'll choose something else. We have a monthly wine club that we run, and I do a write-up for it every month. And in the past, I've just kind of sent it out and wondered who's on the other side. And so this year, because of the virtual tastings, I've gotten to see people's names on their Zoom photo, and I've got to actually see what they look like. So it's really nice just to see who is drinking the wine that I make and hopefully enjoying it. I mean, I don't want to hear any rants that much, but it's been really nice just to see people's faces.
That's good. It's nice to have that connection, and part of me trying to do all this is sort of to bring everyone together a little bit and have a little bit of access for most consumers to see and meet you guys and hear different stories other than just sort of the sometimes the sales pitch that can happen, and it can be awkward when you're busy and working at a winery. So this is hopefully a nice introduction for everyone. Keith, you mentioned a little bit while you're talking about your rant about the guys coming in. Do you want to talk a little bit about the workers? No, Lee's no. Okay, it's just such an issue. I know it was last year. This time last year, the world did shut down. And if you guys want to talk about some of the difficulties that you may have had with some of your foreign workers coming in at that time, you don't have to. But if anybody wants to say, Keith was talking briefly about it, and maybe hopefully we can sort of keep it. But what do you think, Keith? What do you got to say?
Whatever you prepare for, it's not enough. I'll just leave it there. There's lots of curveballs being thrown at every way, and that was last year the same. When we didn't know what was coming down the pipeline, and we would get like 3 or 4 emails a day telling us new protocols and all the things that we had to abide by, to this year thinking that we have everything under control and then working within the government parameters for all the programs that they have has been a bit of a challenge, because there's challenges in everything with this, but you know what, we'll make it through. It's perseverance, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And the good news is that how everybody else feels, as soon as I have the opportunity to put a needle in my shoulder, that needle's going in my shoulder because I need Cuba in December. That's it.
Thanks, Keith. I mean, you guys all work so hard making the wines, and there's a lot of work to be done in the vineyards. And I don't think maybe some people don't realize just how much of a difficult challenge it can be to find consistent workers to get them here, and that whole component to the background of the wine itself. So it's a lot of work, and we're all appreciative. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that component to it? No. Oh yeah, Lee. Yeah. What have you got?
Yeah, I'll just say, like, working with migrant workers during the pandemic has been an extreme challenge, starting from last year all the way to this year. The complete unknowns whether or not we were going to get the guys last year led a huge amount of internal debate. Like when the pandemic first hit, I was one of those ultra paranoid people. I'll admit that I thought the world was going to blow up to a degree, and I thought travel through international borders was probably a bad idea. And I suggested maybe trying to work with some locals, and everybody that had the opportunity to tell me that was going to be nearly impossible voiced their opinion. And we ended up getting the guys, which was great, but everything was delayed. Our planting was delayed. We planted in the middle of a heat wave. And right now I'm dealing with delays in production equipment that we're ordering from overseas because the whole chain is just disrupted. It's been an overwhelming challenge to try to operate during this thing in many different facets.
And I, for one, am very grateful for all the work that you guys do. I can't imagine, the behind the scenes that does go on. It's an enormous amount of work. So you guys are doing a great job. I for one, thank you. I'm grateful for you. So thanks for all that. So speaking of grape growing, I mean, a lot of the questions that I had been asked to ask you guys were primarily about grape growing. So why don't we get into a few of the grape growing questions here? Colin, I'm going to start with you. As a winemaker with ownership in your winery, you chose the county. You chose to grow and make wine here in Prince Edward County. So, and have in such an inhospitable times, what were some of the factors that helped you make the decision to plant here?
Basically, it was the soil and the climate. So Pinot Noir is one of my favorite grapes, favorite wines to drink anyway. And when we looked into coming to the county, the soil just seemed perfect for it. And there's enough heat to get it right. Of course, the only problem, or one of the problems, is the winter. So that was a big thing, but I don't know, it just seemed worth it. The flavors that I tasted at the time, like we bought our property in 2003 and I tasted some of the early Pinots that were around, and I really liked the flavors that were coming out from the area. So that's basically why we decided to come here. And I like a challenge too. And also I didn't realize how much of a pain hilling up actually was going to be. So
They fooled you, eh? They said it was going to be easy, no problem.
Well, something like that. Until you've done it for a little while, the ramifications, like so many things are different because of that. Like the fruiting zone being lower to the ground, which makes it worse for airflow, which makes you more susceptible to bad weather, blah, blah, blah. So there's all these little things that add up, which you don't, of course, really realize right away. But I still think I still think it's all worth it, given tasting the Pinot Noirs that are coming out. I'm happy.
Good, and we're happy for them. Thank you. So, in terms of Pinot Noir, Lee, I know you've worked with fruit from different vineyards in the county, and while you're at Kenty, you had 3 different vineyards, I think, online. And when Ian and I were there and tasted with you in February 19th, you provided us with 3 separate parcels of Pinot from the Little Creek Vineyard, if I remember that. And so seeing how they reacted and knowing what you know about Pinot in the county, I'm curious to know about how all that informed your choices of planting this year, one of the largest single planting at Redtail. And how did that inform your choices to plant, and what clones specifically did you use to plant?
Yeah, so while at Kente, I did have a pretty unique opportunity to work with several different little parcels throughout the county, and it did show how different all the aspects of the different terroirs throughout, and how diverse the flavor profiles could actually be through same grower, same winemaker, same everything, and their wines were so completely different, which adds to the value, I think, of the terroir within Prince Edward County itself. Proximity to the lake and aspect and types of soil, adding drainage, all kinds of things have a huge effect on the overall quality and the characteristics of the wine. The clones themselves at Kente were a bit of an unknown. There's plenty of old plantings and some weird documents and everything like that. So it was a bit of a guessing game for some of it. Some of it was pretty well documented, and it was mainly Dijon clones. To tell you the truth, when I planted here at Redtail, I planted a very similar mix of Dijon clones. When I worked at Malvar for a couple years, we fermented all the clones separately, and I got to see some of the differences within the clones. And to tell you the truth, like some of them were quite distinct, and some of them were pretty like nuanced. And overall, what I was trying to do in the planting, and I think a lot of winemakers and viticulturists do this as well, is try to build character right from the get-go. So by planting kind of a mix, you're all of a sudden, already adding to the layers of your wine just by doing exactly that. So one variety might be pretty high in tannin, the other one a little bit higher in acid, and the other one less acid, more alcohol. But when you put them all together, it becomes more balanced and more complex. Same with like one might be a little bit more earthy and the other one might be more cherry, but when you put them together, you get the cherry dirt. It's not, you never want to be one-sided in anything. It's the same with like when you choose your coopers in the winery and you choose like different forests and different cooperages, you're choosing different characteristics out there. So I would say that would be one of the big things that I learned. The other thing that I learned through my experiences at Kente was the Pinot Noir was amazing in Prince Edward County, and I had to make it a focus at Redtail as well. So it's the #1 planted variety in our fields as well. I fooled around. I try to get some different clones. Try to get Maria Felt, which is a loose cluster Pinot Noir, but I couldn't find any clean stock. That might lead into a different conversation about virus. Trying to find some of the German loose cluster ones, mainly trying to create more sustainability and more spray penetration and less disease pressure. But I've been unable so far to do that. But I also have 2 clones in there specifically for good traditional sparkling wine production. So you might see that in our future.
That's exciting. So the sum of everything is greater than in each individual part, I suppose. That's what you went for when you're planting?
Exactly. Yeah. It's if all you picked was 777, then all you'd be picking early and you'd have a lighter tannic wine. But and if all you had was 828, then you'd be picking a little bit later and you'd have a deeper wine. But if you have 777 and 828, you might space out your pickings and have a more complex wine in the end.
And what percentage of your total vineyard? Now you did 25 acres, which was the largest single planting, if I understand, in the county.
As far as I know, I don't know that for sure, but I think maybe like in 1 year.
Right.
Keith will probably correct me on this because he's looking at me kind of funny right now. Yeah, I think it's over I think it's about a third of the vineyard is Pinot Noir. But we also have,
that's a good chunk,
and Chardonnay planted as well.
That's exciting. That'll be fun to see. Keith, I'm interested. You'd mentioned you are looking for some Pommard clones, and knowing what you know in your clonal diversity within your vineyard there, why Pommard clones? Why are you looking for anything else?
Well, I've got 667, 777, 114, 113, 115, and a Mistral clone. So I've got a lot of different clonal selections of Pinot in the vineyard. So much like Lee said, diversity is good. I've heard great things about Pommard 4. It's predominantly the grape planted in Oregon. So I just want to try it. I want to see what it looks like. Not a lot, 2,000 plants to put in an acre and interplant it, and go from there and see what the end result is. A little more tannic composition in our wine is not a bad thing. I find that Pinot in the county is so amazing because of the fine grain, delicate tannins that we have. So we have something that has a little more robustness to it in terms of its tannic structure. And I don't personally know what the fruit profile thinking of it, because I don't think I've ever tasted 100% Pommard 4. I just want to put it in and see what it does so that it makes a better wine. And if it makes a much better wine or makes a completely totally different wine, I make enough Pinot that an acre, which would be 2 tons of Pinot, if I don't like the clone, you get a little slightly more tannic or different nuance vineyard Pinot Noir than you would anything else. But if it works well in 1 year, maybe it goes into whatever vineyard it's grown in, or maybe it ends up in the Grand Cuvée. So it's just one of those things. The issue is that there's no Pommard 4 imported, so I have to import it from California, and I have to do paperwork on it. So it's going to take a little bit of a while for me to import that, but I'm going to work on it because there's no Pommard 4 available to me other than going that route, and I want to see what it does. So, I'm very fortunate that I have a fairly old Pinot Noir vineyard here, and that the South Clos was planted to Pinot in 02 and 04, and then the church side was completely planted in 06. So, I've got 15-year-old Pinot this vintage, but I'd like to see what some other things do here, because we're definitely getting warmer. So what's wrong with a clone that acts a little bit different in a slightly warmer climate, right? So, because Pommard is on the south end of Beaune, and northern Beaune, southern end of the Côte d'Ivoire, and I think why not give it a try, see what it tastes like. If it doesn't work out, well, then it gets blended into something else. But it's all, for me, it's all about blending. It's all about having the opportunity and the options when it comes to taking the wines that have been made, grown in the season, made in the cellar, or finished in the cellar, and then how do we blend them? How do we make a more complex, more balanced, more, I hate to say more better, but a better wine all around, one that has more life, more energy, more florals, more fruit, more acid, more tannin, more structure, more weight, and ultimately ageability, right? The only reason to plant Pinot and grow Pinot in Prince Edward County is to stake a claim to making Pinot Noir from one of the best places in the entire world. So we're very fortunate that we're not limited by what we do in any way, shape, or form, legality wise. So if we have that opportunity, I think we should embrace it and go with it.
Mackenzie, I'm going to bring you in a little bit of Pinot. You've done you planted a little bit sort of after everyone, after Keith and after Colin, a little bit before Lee. What were some of the choices that you had to plant your Pinot at Trail?
To be honest, it mostly came down to available. So we planted 115, 667, and 777 just because I wanted to diversify a little bit. So I chose the 3. I just think if you have a little more variability, then you can, I like the idea of having the variability and having those kind of work together and hopefully make something that's a little more complex. I have to say though, I mean, I haven't had a lot of vintages at Trail, so I still feel pretty new to it. And I find just with my personal experience, I'm more with Chardonnay. Like I'm still not comfortable with the Pinot. And in terms of actually noticing the differences in the vineyard, I haven't got a handle on that yet. So stay tuned.
Well, we'd be looking forward to all that. But seeing as you mentioned Chardonnay, let's talk a little bit about Chardonnay. As you're on there, what I mean, if we're on the topic of clones and grape varieties, what do you have any particular favorite clones of Chardonnay in the county?
Again, to be quite honest, I don't focus very much on clones, so I feel not the right person to answer this. I've got 2 in my vineyard. I have 76 and 96. But I mean, beyond, I haven't got enough vintages under my belt at Trail to really know the differences in the vineyard. And we've had a couple dry summers. So in terms of just knowing the differences, I don't have the experience. So I think we were gonna send all our questions over to Keith because he likes to talk, right?
Well, I did have a question posted to me by email before this, and I will ask Colin about it. It's Chardonnay. So as we're on the topic there, it was what approach to winemaking best serves Chardonnay grown in the county, as in which best serves, as in allows the terroir to shine through in the grape.
I don't know that I can speak to all the approaches. I mean, personally, I like to do barrel fermentations as much as I can. I also keep some back in stainless usually, so that I don't get overwhelmed with oak. What I do, I can speak to what I do. I destem the chard and I give it a little skin contact, help with a little structure and complexity. So it usually gets 1 to 3 days of skin contact. Then I press, let it sit for a little while, a day or 2 or 3, and then put it into barrels, ferment in there. I think in terms of expressing terroir, you don't want to overhandle your wine. So for me, I do minimal racking. If it's in barrels, usually it just stays in barrel. I also don't stir lees, but there's nothing wrong, I think, with stirring. I just personally don't do that unless I feel I have to. If it's getting a little stinky, then I'll do some more stirring. Yeah, minimal handling. I don't do any fining either on my Chardonnay, and also if I can get away with not filtering, then I'll do that. Sometimes though, if malolactic fermentation hasn't completed, then I will have to do some filtering to make sure it's a stable wine. But yeah, I would say minimal handling is the way to get to express your terroir.
And how much percentage do you do about oak? You said a little bit oak, some stainless.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. There's a lot of practical considerations as well that go into that. So in some years, I've had as little as 50% oak. And then in other years, like in 19, it's almost all in barrels. I have a lot of older oak as well. So I like to have, not too much new oak on the chard.
So why a nice varied approach, and you sort of are vintage specific. You're going to listen to what comes in from year to year.
Yeah, vintage specific, and like I was saying, what I meant with some of the practical considerations is if I had, some years like 17, for example, there's just that it was a great yield, somewhat unexpected, and I'm not able to purchase another 15 barrels to get it all into barrel, right? So then so there's that aspect as well. How much tank space, how many barrels you have. So that also, of course, does affect the mix between the amount in barrel and the amount in stainless. But yeah, given a perfect world, I do personally prefer to do it in oak. But yeah.
Is that your time in California showing through a little bit? Sure.
No, I don't think so. In California, I mostly made. I only made wine as an amateur, and I mostly made Pinot Noir. I did Pinot Noir and some Zinfandel. But yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of big oaky Chardonnays. But here, and I don't know, here in the county, I find anyway that with the acidity, the Chardonnay still is mineral. It doesn't get overly buttery, at least not with the barrels that most of us are using. So it's being in a colder climate than California, we don't make those low acid over oaky Chardonnays.
Yes, thankful for that sometimes. They do have their place, but thanks, Colin. I'm gonna. I know Keith has been doing a lot of research and interest with oak, and I know some time in Burgundy sort of like turned you on and changed your mind a little bit of oak, particularly with Chardonnay. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about how that changed your winemaking here in the county?
Sure. Um, well, I have to be honest. When I took over from Deborah, I had a pretty strong Chardonnay program, and I learned a lot from her when it came to that. And then I have my own distinction of how things go. So I came in with a keen focus on rectifying what I thought we could do better, which was Pinot. And ever since 2017, I've decided that I need to focus on Chardonnay as well. I think we can make better Chard than we've been making. So my trip to Burgundy was to research oak and look at forest, because when I was making wine with Deborah, it was all about Vosges medium toast. And then I came to find out that there's a lot of smaller forests, cooler forests, Tartar woods, different cooperages, different methods of doing everything. And I thought I knew a fair amount. Then I went to Burgundy and realized I knew nothing. So a barrel is a vessel that is very much like wine. It represents the place it comes from, because it is a natural product that is grown in Mother Nature, much like grapes, with slightly less control than grapes are grown. And so a barrel stage can change from the south side of the tree to the north side of the tree. And then the barrel ultimately changes on how the wood's dried, how long it's dried for, and ultimately the artistic side of a barrel is the cooper. So the cooper is the equivalent to the winemaker. How long they toast, the heat level they toast at, the dimension of the chimney from the barrels, all make a difference in how the toasting comes out and how much care and concern they have in the barrel that they make. So it blew my mind that here I was going over thinking I was going to get all the answers to all the questions that I had, and found out that I have more questions than there were possibly to find out answers for. So what it forced me to do was to reevaluate my oak program and how long I aged stuff for, and the concept of using stainless steel. So with 2020, sorry, I'll make Chardonnay 4 different ways. And that's the first time that we've ever done that at Closson Chase. So I'll make a wine that's completely done in stainless steel. I'll make a wine that's fermented in stainless steel, then barrel aged, and allows malolactic to go through in barrel. I'll make a wine that's 100%. I'll make a wine that's 50% stainless steel, 50% barrel fermented. Half of it goes through malo, half of it doesn't. And then ultimately what we're known for, which is barrel fermented, barrel aged Chardonnay. Looking at reducing time constraints in barrel and see if I can get closer to 14 months, as well as potentially doing more stainless steel Chardonnay, and then less new wood. So going with more older wood, larger vessels. A lot of winemakers in the county do use 500-liter barrels. I've got a couple of 400s that I'm doing something funky with. But ultimately, this year's purchase of used barrels will be 4 500-liter puncheons, because I want to see what county oak does on a larger format from my 2 vineyards. So it'll be interesting to see. So that's my take on wood, because I won't talk for the entire time.
Thanks, Heath. That was nice to hear about Chardonnay and how you're using it there. You're using oak there in Chardonnay. So, Lee, I'm gonna bring you in a little bit. 2 things, I guess. While we're on the oak topic, how are you? What are you doing with oak in terms of your Chardonnay making? Are you barrel fermenting it? Are you 100% barrel ferment? Are you considering other vessels?
Good segue there, Jay. Yeah, right now I have been making exclusively barrel fermented Chardonnay, and I love it. I do. But one of the things, the the question that you read, I believe, was said, like, what shows the terroir best through the grape and Chardonnay, and I believe that maybe leaving oak out of the question is maybe a better expression of the terroir itself. And Keith, I love how passionately you talk about how it's another part of the artisanal craft of winemaking is the barrel making itself. But I'm really selfish and egotistical, and I want to show off my stuff a bit more. So I'm going to be going to be purchasing some concrete vessels for the purposes of making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay here in Prince Edward County. And I just feel that for a couple of reasons. One is because I feel that sometimes the oak becomes a bit overwhelming, and I try to stay away from new oak as much as I possibly can right now anyways, but just alleviating that variability and going into something a bit more consistent, but still getting the same kind of characteristics of the élevage, the microoxidation, and the insulating characteristics of the fermentation as well, can be achieved in concrete, and getting a better expression of the minerality and the fruit characteristics and the freshness of the Prince Edward County fruit. Again, this is all in theory, haven't done it yet. But this year we're going to be purchasing some smaller format concrete tanks to start playing around with different producers of them, different shapes, and with the anticipation that we are going to be purchasing some larger format ones for our new building when it is built, because that will be a focus. Another reason why is also the sustainability of the vessels. These are vessels that last an unfinite amount of time, really, as long as they're properly maintained, and you're not shipping over oxygen every year across the ocean because you're using the same vessel time and time again. So I'm really excited about this project. I've halfway bet my career on it, so I'm hoping that it turns out really nice. But I love fresh wine. I love fruit. I love the acidity, and I think that this is a good medium to present that to you.
Well, I know the world of wine is changing a little bit. I mean, you're not alone in trying different vessels. I know Jean-Marc Rouleau and Marceau is making a lot of different wines in different vessels. So glass globes, earthenwares, amphoras, that sort of idea. So it'll be interesting to see how your wines come out with the Chardonnay. I'll be excited to see that.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited too. But like that being said, we'll never get rid of entirely our oak program. It's part of the tradition. I do love the barrel fermented Chardonnays and barrel aged Pinot Noirs. I'm also getting a couple couves as well. Keith, you'll be happy to hear, similar to yours as well. So we'll be doing some oak ferment with the Pinot, but in a larger format style as well. So.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to switch a little bit. I'm going to there's a few questions coming in. I want to get to them for sure, but I'm also interested to know, Mackenzie, for you specifically. I mean, you grew up in the county and has seen many changes in the area, and you got into wine while in university and working at a winery here, where you worked your way up to assistant winemaker and vineyard manager. And from 2015, you've been head winemaker at Trail and have become known for making skin contact whites and other experimental wines, such as sort of the supersonic, made with Concord grapes. There you go. I'm not sure if that's the supersonic, but so would you like to share what the last 5 vintages have taught you about these unique styles of wine?
I mean, to be quite concise, what it's taught me is that is so different, and I have to keep learning every year. I think that's probably something that every winemaker learns. The experimental stuff, though, has been really, I mean, I started in 15 fairly conservatively, made 9 cases of skin contact Sauvignon Blanc. And from there, we've kind of, like, we tasted and decided this, we liked this, we didn't like this. Lee's drinking one of our earlier orange wines, I believe. And we were just talking about it, like, you can see how brown it is in color. It was about a year on skins, and it has no sulfur in it. So it's just, for me, I'm surprised how well it's held up, but after tasting it, it's not as fresh as I want. It's not as clean as I want. So it changed the production a little bit. So over those vintages, I've just learned that there's so much to learn, and essentially using skin contact or using different techniques that aren't necessarily the norm. You just have to keep trying, and you just have to, I don't know, taste, think, and reassess every year and hope it tastes good. Supersonic was a trial, and I just posed it to Alex at Trail Estate, and I was like, oh, and let's just try this, see what happens. And when I first bottled it, I have to admit, I tried it at Christmas with some good friends, and I tasted it and I poured it down the sink. I was like, this is awful. Like, oh, what a shame. And then we tried it again in the spring, and it tasted like Welch's grape juice. So I was really surprised to see that one kind of turn around. And then when I tried it, where we made it again this year, I just kind of made a few changes to the press cycle, as Jay is well aware, because he did the pressing this year. And over about 1,000 hours is what it took. And just, I kind of tightening up some of the methods in the winemaking to make the wines a little cleaner has been the biggest challenge in terms of working more naturally without filtration and with as little sulfur as possible. So just keep tasting and learning. That's really been my experience.
Perfect. So it's a bit of an evolution every year, something different, and just being aware and mindful of what's happening is sort of the most important thing I'm getting, and the ability to try something different too.
Tasting as well, yeah. Tasting, and you are right in that just being able to try new things, that I work for a winery that is willing to do that, because it is a gamble. You don't know what's going to turn out, and especially when you're working without sulfur, it's very risky.
Mm-hmm.
Things don't necessarily hold up. And I guess also educating our customer that, that if you store the wines warm, they're probably not going to taste good if they don't have any sulfur in them, or if some stuff seems to age really well, some stuff doesn't. So there's bottle variation. If anyone's open to PetNat, they've seen it's a learning curve that is ongoing. But yeah, it's fun to taste.
Great. Thanks, Mackenzie. That's very well. Lee, I've had a question come in about I'm asking you because you've most recently, I'm sure everyone's sort of interested in, and knows a lot, but you were the most recent to plant so much, and I think doing your research, you might be able to answer some questions about viruses, specifically sort of what you mentioned. You sort of alluded to a little bit of that too, having difficulty finding virus-free material to plant. But I guess the question was, what are some of the viruses? How is it difficult to source virus-free material, and what are some of the virus issues?
Yeah, so the two main viruses that we're concerned about right now is red blotch and leaf roll. There's a couple others out there, but those would be the two main ones I think. And they're kind of the wine industry dirty little secret to a little degree. It's literally everywhere. You listen to these podcasts with some of the most renowned French winemakers, and they talk about how it's part of the terroir and how they learn to grow it a little bit different and make the wines a little bit different. When I was out in British Columbia, the one big parcel on the Black Sage bench was just riddled with red blotch. But what it actually does is it doesn't actually full on kill the vine right out. It lives within the vine kind of without showing itself for quite some time. And then eventually what most people tend to notice is more of a lack of accumulation of sugars during the ripening season. So it's a delay in ripening. And then you start seeing some different phenotypes, like the red blotches on the leaves, and with the leaf curl, you actually see the curling of the leaves, and that's a pretty serious amounts. And then it shortens the lifespan of the vineyard, so they aren't super healthy. They don't ripen fruit very well. There's a lot of time in red blocks that will become the rosé block, and the number one cause of the spread is through propagation. So picking clean motherwood for the scion in the grafting of the vines is very important. Now, in different places in the world, they've actually developed different types of certification, virus certified free vines, but that means different things in different places. And you talk about one place and somebody agrees with it, and another person says no, it's inadequate. And then you talk about another place and another person agrees with that, and they say it's inadequate. And then you talk about another place and Keith doesn't like anything. So like where are you to choose at some time? So it's very difficult. So nearly all of our chard came from California, from virus certified nursery. In California, what they actually do is they pick a whole block and they do a grid system and they test it for virus. And if it comes up virus free, then that is a virus certified block. And then they're allowed to take scion wood from there and claim that it's virus free. Now, I don't know, but the critique on that is how long do they wait to do another grid system of virus testing, because it can spread through different vectors. So once it's tested virus free doesn't mean it's always going to be virus free. Other places will actually take samples and virus test them that year real time, but then they say they're not taking enough samples, right? Brock just got a multi-million-dollar grant, I believe, to up the virus testing capabilities, because timing and cost were a huge issue. It's a costly thing to go out and test. And if you're going to try to test every one of your vines, like you're going to have to take out a new mortgage on the facility, kind of. So the advancements of this within the wine industry is great, and we'll see more and more developments and more that we can do to kind of take care of it.
Viruses are quite fascinating. When you look at places like Barolo and specifically Nebbiolo, there are sort of three main biotypes of Nebbiolo, and one of them, the most sought after, in fact, Nebbiolo lampia, is a fan leaf affected virus that's become so popular, and no one really talks about it. But if you get into and talk to the vineyards and the vineyard and the winemakers, they'll discuss it a little bit more. They'll be a little bit more open. But it's just one of those things that sometimes it can be good, I guess, is the point. But it is difficult if it comes into your vineyard and you're challenged with it. So. Thanks, Lee.
No problem.
So somebody asked earlier, and I'm going to pose this to Keith because I know he's got some great answers and possibly surprising about in the rise of global warming. What do we see next? Are there any new varieties that could be planted in the next 10 to 15 years we should look out for in the county?
This is where you want me to say Syrah? Yeah, I think Syrah will go here in the next 10, 15 years. Because I think we're warming. We're warming at an alarming rate. I've been growing grapes here for 17 years, 18 years this vintage. And in no time in the last 18 winters have we had 2 winters back to back where we haven't had minus 25. So there's a good indication of what's to come, I think, given the fact that our snowfall has also dramatically decreased in the last 3 vintages. And I think when it comes to those, I think Syrah is something that we will be able to grow. Will it be commercially viable? Maybe. I think we're looking at 1 ton to 1.5 tons, which is kind of like where we're at with Pinot right now. But if Syrah likes a challenge, then this is the place. And if clays and limestones give that varietal a different characteristic, as I think it will, I think that's something good to do. My focus has changed from geotextiles and winter hardiness and frost prevention to drought stress. I think drought stress is the next huge thing that we have to deal with, and I think it's more demanding on the vineyard than winter damage. So we've learned to counterbalance winter here in the county by hilling up. We've learned to mitigate frost by having frost fans or frost protection. You can't mitigate against drought in Prince Edward County unless you're a guy like Lee, who might have water access where he can pump 55,000 liters a day out of the lake. But I know Mackenzie can at Trail. I know Colin can at Stanners, and I can't here at Closson Chase. So if you don't have a water supply source where you can drip irrigate, I think the next biggest challenge in the soils that we have with our drying conditions is huge. So I'm just going to leave it there. I'll just stop at that.
No, thanks, Keith. That's great. There's been a lot of questions about sort of like what's next, what's coming, and things. So that's been good. But you did mention hilling up and how to combat against the winters. For those that don't know how that works and what happens, Colin, do you want to sort of walk us through the process of what you did, I guess, in around Thanksgiving, or what hilling up looks like, and then what happens when you undo it all in the spring?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we have to cover berry canes so they can survive the winter. So basically, after harvest, we have to go out and for each vine, take canes from out of the trellis and tie them down to a wire that's at ground level. And so that's actually an awful lot of work. So it takes our crew something like a month of work in 7 days to get that done. Then once all the canes are tied down at the ground level, then we go through, loosen up the dirt between the rows by cultivating, and then come through with a big V-plow behind the tractor and plow up just as much dirt as we can over top of the vines. And so we have it's always a rush, a limited amount of time to get that done, because you can't, once the ground freezes, can't plow it up, obviously. And also, if the soil gets too wet, then it's also very difficult to get good hills over the vines. So it's always a little tricky, but we've all managed to be able to do that for the most part. So then they're protected, go through the winter. Now in the springtime, we have to get those canes out of the dirt, and so that's another huge thing. We can do quite a bit of it with the tractor. So in my system, I have a wire that's at ground level. We can go in and grab that wire and raise it up higher. So we do that first, and then that gives you room to go in with a little plow underneath the canes and scoop out as much dirt as you can around all the plants. Once you're done with that, you can't get too close to a vine though, because there's a lot of vines, and you have to have a lot of concentration with the tractor and the plow in order not to take, because you don't want to take out any of the vines, and so your error rate has to be extremely low. So in order for your error rate to be really low, you can't be getting too close to a vine. So there's always a little bit left around the base, and then that we have to do by hand. Or sometimes if you get lucky and the soil conditions are just right, it falls away. But more often than not, you have to go in with a hoe to remove that final amount. So, and then we have to retie those canes that we pulled up out of the ground to a higher wire that we want to be the fruiting wire, because we want to have our fruit a certain distance above the ground, so which is another really long process. So it's a very labor-intensive thing, and a lot of us are now experimenting with geotextiles, fabric, for winter protection as well. I've done a little bit of it. Mackenzie's done more, and Lee's going to be doing a whole lot more. So they can probably talk about that if people are interested in the geotextile method.
Good. Thanks very much, Colin. I mean, that's good. And so as an alternative, Mackenzie, do you want to talk about the geotextiles?
Sure. So we use geotextile fabric. It basically looks like a white piece of felt. And there's a couple different techniques that growers have, but we use it the same way that you would use soil in a hill. I continue to tie down my vines, so I keep it quite low to the ground. And then I put 2 pieces of fabric, and I actually just fold one over the other, and then I clip it with a clothing tag gun. So it just holds it in place a little bit. And we just leave that up. So it creates a little tent, and that keeps it warm enough. So I have to remember my numbers. I just did a presentation, but we got down to minus 20. I think it was minus 24, and it was like minus 5 under the fabric. It was a mass difference. So I do measure the temperature above the fabric and below the fabric, and it's really amazing. I just logged the temperatures the other week, and I was looking at the graph of a temperature sensor that was above the ground, that was above the fabric, and it was very low, very cold temperatures, and then I was looking at under the fabric, and it was much warmer, and then the temperature sensor must have come out somehow, and so the lines just immediately went together. So it's just really neat to see the comparison. But and then in the spring I just go through and open them up, and then I do tie my canes up again, so I have to go through and do a little bit of extra labor, but it works really well. It's great.
Yeah, it's good. So it's nice to see an alternative regarding hilling geotextiles. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what I am going
to. Just say yes. No. We're just talking about, like, you're either tying down and then have to like pull the canes back up in the spring, whether you are hilling up with a machine and soil or whether you are geotextiles.
I think you could do it. You could also look at a different system. I just haven't figured one out yet. I like having a little bit higher fruiting zone, so that's why I retie. But I think there's probably a happy zone where you could maybe just tie your canes once. I did a 1-row trial this year, so we'll see how it goes, where I just tied the canes I wanted, and I just covered them with the fabric. So we'll see if they're alive and they're, then that's pretty good.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring in, someone's asked a question and wants to be brought in to ask it. So I'm going to bring in Rick, and we can, here we go. Oh, here we go. Yeah, go for it, Rick.
Thanks. Hi, guys. The Niagara Winemaker has been calling 2020 the vintage of the century. I haven't heard whether or not the winemakers in the county are echoing that.
You're muted, Jay.
Sorry. There we go. Thanks, Rick. Keith, why don't you let us know what your thoughts were on 2020?
Best since 07. Better than 07.
Better than 07.
Oh, 07 was the vintage in the county. 07 and 17 were the best vintages that I've ever worked, and 2020 is better. Concentration, richness, roundness, ripeness, fullness. I've never had Pinot on the vine come off perfect with over 105 days of hang time. Hang time in 2020 was exceptional. So that's it. That's what I gotta say. Pardon my English here, but if you fuck up 2020, then it's on you. That's simple. Yeah. No, you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to make sure that it didn't go VA or get anything in it. That's all you had to do. You just let the wine become the wine, guide it along the way. And it's going to be an absolutely spectacular vintage of what I taste. But that's just my place. Everybody else is going to have a different opinion, and that's good. That's why we do this.
Yeah.
I'm good.
And that's the point of it. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to ask Colin too. I mean, I know Lee just planted. Mackenzie was a little bit. The vineyard there was a little bit challenged this year, we should say, maybe 2020. But
I'll definitely speak to that after Lee.
yeah, no, I was going to ask Colin because I know Lee just planted. So
Colin, yeah.
If that's all right, Colin, what were some of your thoughts on 2020?
Well, 2020, it's a good vintage. It depends what you like, right? It was a very hot, warm year, so it's going to make bigger, more tannic Pinot. So if that's your or wines, so it's specifically if we're talking about Pinot, if that's what you want to make, then it's a great vintage. But some of the cooler vintages actually work really well for Pinot as well, right? So I'm not going to say it's the best vintage ever. And the only disappointment, I guess, that I had in 2020 was just the quantities were lower for us because there was a really cold night back in November of 19. And that was before the vines were acclimatized to the cold, and they weren't healed up in our vineyard at that point either. So some parts of the vineyard didn't have much fruit because of that. So we got a lot less. But I agree with Keith. It's a very good quality what we got. But then again, it also depends what you want, what your favorite types of wine. If you like the bigger, heavier, more tannic wines, then it's a great vintage.
That's kind of what I was alluding to, Mackenzie, about the 19. I'm just wondering. I mean, you worked a lot with more Niagara fruit this year than, unfortunately, too much of the home vineyard because of that early frost. How did you find the fruit coming in from Niagara?
It was, I mean, like everyone's saying, 2020 was pretty perfect vintage. Everything was, it was really perfect. I don't necessarily, I mean, I won't go all out like Keith and say that it's the best vintage because I like to diversify a little bit as previously. But what Colin was saying in November, it was November, and I went down to -20. And so a lot of the vineyards, if you weren't hilled up or you weren't covered with geotextiles, your plants took a really big hit. So in terms of actual crop load, I would say it wasn't the best vintage for, but I guess the underlying message for our customers would be it was a tasty vintage. So there's not a lot, and if you are thirsty, go shopping.
I mean, does anybody have any questions? I think I've got most of them. There's a lot of love for Gamay. If anyone wants to talk about that, is there any other questions that anybody has in the chats, or anybody else that wants to offer anything else? No? Okay. Keith, tell me, what have you got?
Well, I'll talk about 2020 because I think it was what I said was misinterpreted. There's no such thing as a vintage of the century. It's the best vintage I've seen in the county to this point, and I've been growing grapes here for a long time. So we're 21 years into this thing, and we all look to make great wine every vintage that we possibly can, and each wine is going to be different. But 2020 was special, and I don't disagree with everybody in terms of quantity. Quantity is low. For me, quantity is less the issue of the November 22nd, I believe it was, when we got that -22. For me, it's more about dehydration and drought stress in my vineyard. That's why my yields were low, and I am wearing pants. and I think it's a vintage that, given everything that has gone on, and I made this comment before in another conversation, was I truly do believe I was looking at a bottle of 2020 in a Zoom call that I was doing the other day, and if they always say 2020 is hindsight, right? So when it comes to 2020, it's going to be it's going to be family member. It's going to be a vintage that is pretty exceptional across the board. Some wines are going to stand out more than others. I think for us here at Closson Chase, the Pinots are very much like Colin said, very big, very bold, but with good acidity. Chardonnays are probably typical to our site. They're going to be quite rich, quite round, but I made some choices to try and retain as much acidity as I possibly can. I found that the fruit tasted fantastic when I was coming in with great balance. So I think 2020 is one of those vintages that it's going to be site selection and winery based upon where things are. Like 18 for me was not my greatest vintage. I like the wines from 18, but I find 18 was much hotter than 2020, and therefore it demonstrated itself in the final product. But I think as a whole, and on Ontario winemaking overall, I think that 2020 is one of those vintages where we can hang our hat, and I think it's one of the vintages out of the last 4 that people will be drinking last out of their cellar, which is a good representation of the vintage in terms of what it was able to do for the wines, and then what we choose to do as winemakers to demonstrate that in the past.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
We all managed to make wine while wearing masks, which I think is pretty spectacular.
And dealing with no labor and changing everything, and barrels not coming on time and everything else not going the way that you wanted it to because of logistic chains. But we made it through. So it's going to be a wine that will talk about the year, we'll talk about the summer, and if you're somebody who collects wine, 2020 is going to be one of those wines that in 10 years you're going to sit down and hopefully we'll all be able to say, you remember when COVID came, and this is what resulted from, right? And that's we can look back and move forward, knowing that it produced, for all the other heartache and hardship that's gone on in the last 12 months, it produced a good wine that we can all hang our hats on and say, this is a good wine. Because I can guarantee if you ask my 3 other colleagues on this call and some of the other winemakers that I've seen participating in here, nobody's disappointed with the fruit that they got in 2020. Volume wise, yeah. Quality wise. So I think there's going to be lots of good wine in it's going to be good wine in 2020. There's just not going to be lots of it. It's a very Burgundian style. Mr. Baker, I see you're unmuted.
Well, that's great to hear.
With lots to say too.
Not a lot to say. I just wanted to clarify, Jay, that I did make Prince Edward County wine this year from the great Yvonne Batiste Cavalier's Hubs Creek Vineyard. Which I gotta say that the fruit that we got from Hubs Creek was one of the things I gotta say is just it was pristine. The fruit quality, as far as like the lack of mildew and botrytis and breakdown, was incredible. It was more of like you could pick days and go out and pick at your leisure, rather than looking at the Weather Network and being like, oh shoot, we got to get as much as we possibly can get off because there's a severe weather event coming or something like that. We did not have that this year, which was one of the big things. Somebody down the road in the comments asked, what did we contribute it to? The lack of precipitation, higher heat units, more growing degree days. Sorry, I got kids coming in the room. Would be a big one. So you achieves good phenolic ripeness, but one of the things that I noticed that was quite different in 2016, which was like a drought year similar to it, we had really out of whack pHs and acidity, where the acidity seems to retain itself throughout this vintage. So very little tweaking of any of the numbers or any of the taste. It was just like you said it and forget it, like he said, like you just got it into wine. We've actually sold a heck of a lot of the wine that we already made in 2020 because we took a different approach to some of it. But what we have been selling has been super well received already. So it's been going really, really well already.
That's fantastic to hear, and I apologize, Lee, for forgetting that you're lucky to use Baptista's fruit. That's fantastic, and again, part of the whole beautiful thing about wine is that listen, we've all experienced a kind of a weird year, but the weather was fantastic, and you all have different opinions about it, and you're all going to make great different wines from it. So that to me is the most magnificent thing. And we have the opportunity to be able to taste them all, which is fantastic. So we thank you for that. That's been fantastic. Thank you guys for your time. Does anybody have anything else to say before we round it out here? No, feel okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, guys, again for your time. That's been amazing. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay, for doing all this. This is awesome. It's nice to get everybody together and have a conversation that's not COVID related. It's more about wine, and get to look forward to the coming vintage. So thank you for putting all this together. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you to my fellow colleagues for allowing me to ramp.
Thumbs up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay.
My pleasure. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you.
Thanks, guys. Hey, Carrie. Paul. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time, guys. I appreciate that.